Great configuration, super happy. We wouldn't be able to do this without the Whisker pole, and it's working great. We've been on autopilot for the last 3 hours or so, and we're moving along, and it's very comfortable and it's flat.
Hello, and welcome back to Life 4.0. This is Tom. This video is a continuation of our series on Whisker poles. Today, I'm going to walk you through the installation process for a Whisker pole, as well as the deployment of a pole for downwind sailing. If you have not already, be sure to watch the previous video on the benefits of a Whisker pole and how to select the right one for your boat. As I mentioned in our first video, we opted for a vertically mounted telescoping pole along the mast. In our observations, this is the most common mounting configuration, especially amongst cruising sailboats, as the pole is out of the way yet rigged and ready to go. For our installation, I did all the prep work myself, but hired a rigger to mount the actual hardware on the mast. Because our boat was up on stands in a boatyard, safety regulations prohibited owners from going up the mast. But you'll see in this video that you can easily do this work yourself if you so desire. So let's get right into it. We went with a force bar pole and mounting hardware. If you choose a Selden pole or another manufacturer, you will have roughly similar hardware. First, there is the track, or T-track as it is commonly called. You'll need enough track for roughly the length of your collapsed pole. We went with the force bar all carbon 13 to 24 foot pole. Fully collapsed, it is 13 feet or about 4 meters long. So I bought 15 feet or about 4.5 meters of track. We started the track about 1 foot or 1/3 of a meter up from the deck. T-track has a slight convex shape to it to accommodate the curve on the front part of some masts, with the Selden track having a much more significant curvature to it. Our mast is completely flat in the front, but the force bar T-track fits just fine. Attaching the track will be one of the more time-consuming parts of the installation. There are two options here. You can use rivets or threaded bolts to attach the track. I wanted the option to easily remove the track in the future, so we went with threaded bolts. With holes spaced every 4 inches, you'll be drilling a lot of holes. To make it easier, we used a combination 1/4-inch drill and threaded tap tool. It drills the right size hole and then taps the threads, all in one push with the drill. You want to buy several of these tools, as they can get dull or break after drilling so many holes. Before you screw in each bolt, be sure to coat the bolt and the track hole with a corrosion inhibitor, such as a product like Lanacoat. This will inhibit the corrosion between the two dissimilar metals, the aluminum of the mast and track versus the stainless steel bolts. Once you have the T-track in place, you'll need to mount 2 track stops, one for each end of the track. However, make sure you slide on the appropriate car hardware first before attaching the stops. For our setup, we used a force bar toggle car. It has a part number T125. This car has a pin that mates with a hole in the inner end of the Whisker pole called a UTS fitting. This provides a solid connection and is designed to withstand the tremendous lateral forces when the Whisker pole is in use. For vertical storage, you will also need a force bar VPC, or vertical pole car, that is mounted just below the toggle car on a short line. This Chocks style car grips the upper end of the pole. When the pole is stored vertically, all of this gear holds the upper end of the pole firmly, but you will also need a way to secure the bottom end at the foot of the mast. We used a force bar fixed mast chock. It looks a lot like the VPC car, and the pole wedges inside this collar. You can also use a standard deck chock, either a wire style one like this, or the version that is used for deck stowing a pole. I would have preferred to use one of these options, as it holds the end of the pole more securely. The pole can release from that collar with a strong tug. But we had mast wiring in the way at the base of the mast. A deck chock also tends to protect the area from jib sheets wrapping themselves around the bottom of the pole when tacking, resulting in a dismounted pole, a problem we experienced at one point. The toggle and VPC cars are moved up and down the T-track by means of control lines. For this, you will need 2 cheek or turning blocks, one at the top, the other at the bottom, as well as a pair of jam cleats or stoppers to lock the cars in position. We used a similar drill and tap combo tool and stainless bolts to attach these to the outside of the mast. In some boats, you will see these car control lines run inside the mast and exit at the stopper area, but I think this is unnecessary work, and you risk weakening the mast with the additional holes for the exits. We chose to mount the blocks and stoppers on the outside of the mast, and it has worked fine for us. We also found that positioning the stoppers at shoulder and waist height respectively is the most comfortable for a standing crew member to pull and secure these control lines. You will also need to make arrangements for the pole lift, or sometimes called a topping lift or uphaul. This control line attaches to a bridle on the pole and runs up to the mast above the T-track and then down to the deck, ideally back to the cockpit. For sea rows, Jeannot had installed an in-mast sheave at the factory, and we used that for the pole lift. But you can also mount a pad-eye or tang and attach a block to that if you don't have any pre-existing options. With our force bar pole, there was a short loop at the outer end of the outer tubing, and it is tempting to attach the pole lift here, but don't do this. You can damage the pole by only supporting it from this middle location, especially while it is extended. It is important to make a bridle from this loop to the outer pole end fitting. To this bridle, we attached a snap shackle, so it can slide along the bridle and pull equally on both ends. From here, the pole lift goes up to that sheave in the mast, right above the top of the T-track, down inside the mast, and then exits the mast base and runs back to the cockpit. We did not have an available mast exit for this line, so we had to cut open the mast to mount a new exit. This is accomplished by first cutting a hole at the top and bottom of the exit location using a hole saw that has the same radius as the exit plate. Then, using a grinder, you can cut out the rest of the opening in between the 2 holes. Lastly, you'll need to make arrangements for a foreguy, or sometimes called a downhaul. This is the control line that pulls the pole down and also slightly towards the bow. It works in tandem with the pole lift and toggle car to control the height and levelness of the pole. Typically, the foreguy attaches to the outer end of the pole and comes down to a pad-eye on the center line of the foredeck. From here, it is led back to the cockpit. Jeannot had already installed a pad-eye at the factory in the centerline position. But if you don't have one here already, be sure when you are installing it to add a backing plate or at least some large fender washers to the through bolts of the pad-eye. The foreguy can have a lot of force on it as the sail tries to lift the pole in a gust of wind or rolling of the boat. Okay, that wraps up the installation of the Whisker pole. For your reference, here's a complete parts list for our installation. The major components came from Force Bar, with the rest of the items sourced from a standard hardware store and chandlery. One final word on the installation. It is easy to get overwhelmed by all of these new control lines on board your boat, but they all serve an important purpose of precisely controlling the position of the Whisker pole while you are underway. So for that, let's move on to the actual deployment of the pole while sailing downwind. For the purposes of this video, I will be assuming a short-handed crew, just 2 people. We also should go through some quick safety items first. Due to the unpredictable nature of setting a Whisker pole, it is important all crew wear life jackets, and anyone that will be leaving the cockpit have a tether and be clipped into a jack line. In addition, it's important to have a preventer on the mainsail in case of a wind shift. Now, let's quickly review the lines and gear so you are all familiar with the terminology I will be using. This line, for pulling the outer end of the pole down, is called the foreguy. Sometimes you might hear it called a downhaul. This line, for pulling the outer end up, I will be calling the pole lift. Its alternate names are topping lift or uphaul. It connects to the pole in 2 points using a snap shackle to a bridle. Lastly, there are the control lines for the inner end, or sometimes called the butt end, of the pole, as a toggle car slides up and down the track to level out the pole. These control lines are held in position by using stoppers or cam cleats. So I'll walk you through now how Karen and I deploy the pole. One of us is in charge of the cockpit, Karen in this example. The other, me, heads to the foredeck. The steps for deploying the pole on sea rows are as follows. First, we set the boat on a broad reach course, around 130 to 140 degrees apparent wind angle. This is important. You don't want the wind right at your back, dead downwind, as you might risk an accidental jibe of the mainsail. On a broad reach, you can unfurl the headsail in a more controlled manner, with it shadowed from the wind behind the mainsail. Next, we set the autopilot. This is critical to free up hands for the rest of the cockpit work. Autopilots traditionally have a difficult time holding a course downwind. Check your autopilot's sensitivity settings so that you can trust that it will hold a steady course. Alternatively, if you have a third crew member, that person's sole job should be steering a steady, broad reach course. Next, loosen both the pole lift line and the foreguy. We keep both of these lines attached to the whisker pole when it is stowed in order to save time during deployment. We have both of these lines led back to the cockpit so they are easier to manage. Next, I go to the foredeck and open up the stoppers on the car control line so the pole will be able to slide down the track. Grasping the lower end of the pole firmly, I pull it out of the mast chock and carefully walk it forward to the bow. The inner end of the pole, with the stoppers open, will want to free fall to the bottom of the track. So you'll want to hold the pole closer to the middle to slow the car's fall on the track. In this sequence, Karen came up to help square away a few lines, but normally she is back in the cockpit in charge of lines there. Next, I open the jaws on the outer end of the pole and load the sheet for the headsail into it. At this point, we are ready to raise the pole off the deck. Karen pulls in on the pole lift line to get the pole roughly level. If necessary, I pull on the car control line to raise the inner end of the pole. In this example, it was already at a good initial height on the mast. Next, I pull on the extension line to extend the end of the pole out to its proper length, in this case about 2 meters. For your first time, this will be a bit of trial and error to find the right length of the pole. We found it helpful to place a label on the mast next to the T-track with both the proper pole height and extension amount for the particular sail we are pulling out, and whether we are on a broad reach or in a dead downwind wing and wing configuration with that sail. These labels make it very easy to dial in the correct position and extension of the pole. Once you have the sail unfurled, there will be a lot of lateral pressure on the car, making it very difficult to make further adjustments. At this point, we recheck the levelness of the pole. When you extend the pole length, due to the nature of the bridle, the pole can angle up. You'll need the cockpit person to lower the pole lift to get the pole level again. Okay, we are now ready to unfurl the sail. I am no longer needed on the foredeck, so I return to the cockpit. To unfurl the sail, both Karen and I are working simultaneously together. I winch in the sheet, while with my other hand I am controlling the speed of the furling line. Karen is keeping a close eye on the tension of both the pole lift and the foreguy. As the sail unfurls and the sheet is tensioned, the pole will start to swing backwards away from the bow. This means that it is very important there is slack in the foreguy. You don't want to be sheeting in the sail while pulling against tension in the foreguy, or you could break the pole. But at the same time, you don't want too much slack in the foreguy, or the pole will fly up out of control at a steep angle. This is a tricky step, and you both have to be communicating very clearly with each other, with all eyes forward watching for any issues. Once the sheet is trimmed to a position you are happy with, it is time to tension and stopper the foreguy and pole lift to hold the pole level. Good job! You can take a deep breath. As you are sailing along, if you need to trim in or ease out the headsail sheet, remember that the foreguy has to be adjusted at the same time. If the sheet is trimmed in, the foreguy will simultaneously need to be eased out. If the sheet is eased out, the foreguy will need to be trimmed in. Likewise, the foreguy and pole lift have a similar fate. If the pole lift is trimmed in, the foreguy will have to be eased out. One final step on the deployment. If the ultimate desire is to sail wing and wing on a dead downwind course, we like to deploy the headsail on the pole behind the mainsail, as we just discussed, and then jibe the mainsail over to the other side. This is much easier, in our experience, than trying to set the headsail in the wing and wing configuration right away, as it is a lot of pressure on the whisker pole and the crew. Now, let's move on to the steps for furling the headsail and stowing the pole. You'll want to practice this process repeatedly, as more often than not, you will be doing this when the wind has increased to an unsafe level, meaning that getting everything put away as quickly as possible will be critical. Thankfully, it's a pretty straightforward process. The first step is to furl the headsail.
So our exit plan for this kind of thing, if the wind gets too strong, or if we get a squall coming up behind us, is simply to roll in the jib. So I've got the jib furling line all ready to go on this winch. The nice thing about this, you just roll in the jib and the whisker pole is gonna slowly drift forward, and you can control it a little bit with the foreguy and the pole lift, but you can just go ahead and roll the jib in, and the pole is gonna be connected to the sheet, so it's not gonna go wildly too far away. And then you can go up on the foredeck and deal with stowing the pole, but at least that reduces a lot of the energy from moving the boat forward.
Once the sail is furled, one person goes to the foredeck and retracts the pole fully. The cockpit person eases the pole lift so that the foredeck person can reach the outer end of the pole to release the sheet from the jaws. The stoppers for the pole car control lines are opened. The foredeck person walks to the middle of the pole and slowly pushes the inner end up the mast track. The bottom end of the pole is pushed into the mast chock. And finally, any loose lines are tidied up. That's it. Welcome to the world of performance downwind sailing. There's a lot more lines to deal with, but hopefully you will see that with a bit of extra effort, you can sail both faster and more in control when on a downwind course. As always, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we encourage you to like it so that others can more easily find this kind of content. Lastly, if you have not already, please consider subscribing to our channel and commenting below. We always love hearing from our viewers. Until then, fair winds.